hide something. This is part of the ornament. And then the buildings took the same thing.
Well, I think this is...
Well, criticize the old ladies and not the jewelry. And if you're talking...
And those who make the jewelry are criticized, certainly.
And objective architecture is for objects and not for people.
Well, I mean, that's a play on words.
Well, to me, those words mean something quite real. And I think that you can own, just as you could, you can't design, say, a house for everybody that's any good, that will suit anybody. But a house that's designed for somebody, for one person, can suit many people. And all that I am saying is that we need to start with the specific and the real, and in architecture, most importantly, with people. And whether something looks like a hollyhock and it's convenient and good salesmanship to call it a hollyhock has nothing whatever to do with its rightness as ornament and as a climax of the design of the entire building.
Well, it is all contaminated. The Barnsdale house, in the chandeliers, the light posts, everything is a hollyhock bush. Now, don't tell me it isn't. And Mr. Wright certainly has been contaminated with this kind of phobia because he wanted to please Mrs. Barnsdale, according to Mrs. Schindler. I didn't know it. She told me that. So I'm repeating that now. Is that really a very sinful thing to do as an architect, or is it playing with gimmickry, or is it being objective as a serious architect? To me, I said Mr. Wright was not serious then.
Well,
that's what I'm saying.
I come back to the old question.
It matters a great deal.
How can you rationalize, how can you defend having had a glass of wine for dinner?
But you're talking about food. Listen,
that's
food.
That's just an ornament. It has no food value.
Why is it not food value? Ask many doctors will tell you a lot of iron. It circulates the blood. It digests the blood. Why not? Wine has some value.
Raphael, we've had a wonderful audience here tonight.
All right, let them ask some questions.
Would you entertain some questions? Would you entertain some questions from the audience? Are there any questions?
Yes. Mr. Soriano, do you believe that there's some objective body of information that architects can draw on that aren't?
Yes, in the scientific field, never in the arts. The arts has never been an objective thing, has been a mythological, talismanic, mythical, religious thing. That's all it was. Even in the cave drawings in Altamira and Lascaux, it was purely for incantation, for magic. They still keep ruminating. The painters and sculptors keep doing that today without really understanding. Only it was done en masse with lots of people together, never one artist. Today it has degenerated into the Picasso, Chagall, Matisse, and you call it, whatever. So it's an affectation today. It has no meaning at all with society.
And you think architecture is an extension of that?
No, I didn't say that at all. I said that the architects have been contaminated in the past with this type of things, with frescoes in the Renaissance. What was it? What the paintings were in the cathedral.
He thought so fast, and ideas came so fast that he couldn't get them down on paper. I worked with him for I say, a couple of months.
One artist today has degenerated into the Picasso, Chagall, Matisse, and you call it, whatever. So it's an affectation today. It has no meaning at all with society.
And you think architecture is an extension of that?
No, I didn't say that at all. I said that the architects have been contaminated in the past with this type of things, with frescoes in the Renaissance. What was it? What the paintings were in the cathedrals. Why? Because they didn't have television, they didn't have the radio, they didn't have books. What was it? The propaganda. What kind of a subject? Religious subject. Why? Because the people used to gather in the cathedral. What were the subjects? Angels, religious subjects only. That was a propaganda type of thing. And then it has come down to us as a very degenerative, confused issue. And most people keep ruminating that. I call this cultist. It has nothing to do with today's civilization. Today we have tremendous thinking. We can investigate with computers, with the television, with chemical analysis, what there is in Venice, what there is in Mars, what there is in the moon. Now this is our civilization today. What all the paintings contributed? Nothing. The scientists contributed something.
But how do you perceive tapping into this body of scientific knowledge to apply to the design of shelter. What makes you think that we can tap into computers to design shelter? And
all the things, yes, it's a good question. There are lots of things today we are learning from designing of these instruments we send to the moon into fantastic degrees of temperature changes and speeds with insulation values. This will teach us a great deal to be able to design very operatively today. We talk about sun, energy, and all that as if it was some magic word, energy. We just call it that. We can put a slanting thing like that to get the sun's rays of energy, as if that was the only way. While in the industry for space, they've been doing fantastic research. We as architects are doing nothing. What I say is we should go really to the space. We should go to all these areas to search. Not in the arts. We'll never learn anything there. Never. We are backwards, yes? To whom are you addressing the question, madam?
Can I ask you a question? I'd like to make a mistake.
Okay.
It's just my observation. Picasso once said that no man can escape his age. Whether he wants to or not, he cannot escape his age. Mr. Soriano, can't you see that you're really all saying the same things? Each of you who does his thing has done it as part of all the things that you have sifted and assimilated and integrated as part of your whole life, as part of the things that have gone before, and each of you has expressed that in a different way. What you're each of saying is that now it's time to perhaps understand what is taking place now, assimilate, integrate that, and express that in another way. And again, we will be creatures of our age, and we will never escape that.
I agree. I agree with you. However, the next question you should have added with it, or statement, should have been not only to be each one of us are part of that age, but to try to understand our age. That's what we haven't done. Now, if we do that, then you'll find out Picasso is now untenable with our age. All the Matisses are untenable. What is tenable today are this tremendous, beautiful knowledge that we can tell, we can study what type of earth, what type of bacteria is in Mars, what is in the moon. All this means a lot. We learn a great deal. Now, some of these people are saying, oh my God, yes, man, but you know, we learn a great deal. We can tell about the heartbeat. We can tell about monitoring heart, the way we function. We learn a great deal about us by the same ventures. We can learn it through the paintings, I can assure you, with all the magic incantations. Never. Even color hasn't been learned that way, only through scientists.
Well, I think Soriano made a mention of Bach very tall. Would he negate the music of Bach because he had trills in his music?
I beg your pardon, sir?
Would you negate and cancel the importance of Bach's music because he was trills in his music? What I'm trying to say is that, coming back to the discussion of Louis Sullivan, you almost discarded the contribution he made because he was ornament on his buildings. I think we missed the importance of his architecture. He had the structure that you are talking about.
You have a very good question. I can answer that very beautifully. First of all, the difference between Sullivan's ornamentation and his structure and Bach's ornamentation and the structure are entirely two different things. One is a tremendously objective statement of sound or vibrations. The other one is an imitation of ornaments which derive from the Moors, believe me. Because what is it when you make a vibrato? What does that mean? Nothing really, except there are so many vibrations, aren't they? They're energies. This is something that the ornament, a flat ornament, a pictorialist, static ornament by the Arabs imitated by Sullivan, has nothing to do with the structural integrity of the building that is doing work together.
No, that ornament is also matter, which is energy. It's another form of energy.
Ornament, listen, ornament is something that the critics have used as such, but in the reality, when you listen to the structure of Bach, what he's doing in tonalities, some people have called it ornament, of course call it Baroque. It has nothing to do with Baroque or ornament. The man, Bach was so, well, you have to define again what ornament. Look, let me tell you something. If you take a guitar, and I asked you, I said, make me a sad thing with one of the tonalities, with a G or a D, what would you do? Okay, like that. You say, I'm making you sad. What are you doing? You're doing the microtones. The Indians understood this very well. Schoenberg composes with 12-tone scale, which is a lot of nonsense. The Hindus have done that with microtone scales. They're vibrations, they're energies. They don't call it that.
Bill.
You talked about sort of space going to Mars as kind of ultimate achievement of science. And yet, there seems to be no evidence that exploring Mars has any benefit for humanity. Perhaps, the magic and the spirit, beginning with the cave drawings, probably that spiritualness, perhaps that is what's lacking in our society, and perhaps through architecture that can be rediscovered through understanding the human being and their relation to their spaces.
I am all for understanding human beings. I am all for understanding the cave drawings. I'm all for understanding all the things we do scientific into space. But certainly I don't want to mix the issues that one will teach the other, and any more than the plow can teach you how to make very interesting excavation of the field with very modern instruments. Yes, I don't deny this. We all have to do that. There's no question. We're not talking in vacuum. Whatever we do for human beings as architects, that means we have to serve this humanity. But we have to serve in our own era today with the best technological advancements.
Why technological?
Because this is our era. Our era is this. We have tremendous metallurgy. We know a great deal about everything today, much more so than we knew already. Yes, of course. Yes, of course. Are you riding a car today? Driving a car to come here? Or you drive a donkey? Does that make you different? Well, no, you're driving an instrument that serves you more. This is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, but I don't see my environment as
Well, the whole, it's not, the environment is not, environment is a word. I know at Cal, up north, there is the school environmental design because they made a graduate class of that. And I know some architects, I ask them, what are you? I said, I'm an environmentalist. I ask them, what is that? They don't know what it is. What's environment? What do you do? You design environment?
Historically stand out are not the things with a great deal of ornamentation on them. They're the things that are structurally sound. And maybe the tie-in is that in an age in which we need to use materials to their fullest, we're going to require all of the technology that's available to us in order to be able to stretch these materials to their limits. And in doing that, it seems to me that we approach the natural order a little closer. And in doing that, we express more beautifully that natural order, and therefore the beauty or the art of it comes out of that expression itself, and that the technology can be used therefore as a tool to express that nature more fully.
I think you said it beautifully, darling. What's your name? Huh? Renee, bravo. And you know, that's a good, great, there's a good girl that you're talking about, those marvelous women coming to the rescue. Yes, mademoiselle, you have another question?
I wanted to move away from the philosophical and ask what you're doing now, all of you gentlemen, if you're actively designing now, and how you're relating what you do now to what you did in the past, what changes.
Start.
You're first.
What are we doing now, you say? Well, I hate to tell you what I'm doing right now. Actually, I'm acutely aware now that the really important problems of the world, which which go beyond the problems of the United States. I mean the need for, I mean it sounds rather corny to be dwelling on this subject, but really the fact that an enormous percentage of the population are living on a endurable level of subsistence, and that the threat of war hangs over us still, although we're not acutely aware of it. I mean, the hatreds and hostilities that mark international politics are such that one can't get as much satisfaction as out of architecture as one grows older, as one did when one was quite young. When you can be completely immersed in something, you can forget the other problems. Not, by the way, in the lifetime of us antiquities here, there were 2 world wars and a number of minor ones involving the United States. I mean, during the time that we were alive, and the possibilities are certainly not less now. I don't want to get off the subject. What I'm saying is that as you become aware of this, and as you find a couple of generations beyond yourself of people with whom you can identify, I mean, just by ties of blood, you see. I didn't mean in blood of bloodshed. I just meant heredity. I'm referring to children and grandchildren, you see. I don't know why I should have pussyfooted about it, not admitted that in the first place. What I'm getting at is that you can't view one, or at least I can speak only for myself, I can't be as excited about an architectural project as I was a few decades ago, particularly since when it comes to residences now, I'm saying residence is it's a special kind of third cousin factor in architecture. But there are more and more people with a little smattering of knowledge, say, about design or architecture or art. I think that there's a little more interference. You see, the architect should collaborate with the client. They're not competitors. But sometimes you'll find that there's a completely opposite objective. And then one realizes that, in a way, the practice of architecture on a small scale is too capricious. One can't take it as seriously as one did when one was young, because it is fun still, but you wonder really whether the same amount of effort might not have been much more productively employed if it were possible to work on a problem of a different scale and a little less subject to conflicts of whimsy. I don't know whether I'm saying it. I mean that I just add another paragraph and there's no point in it.
I would feel happier about seeing projects of larger scale if I had more confidence in the quality of the design that would go into them. In most cases, I'm glad they're no larger than they are. In most cases, I wish they were smaller. My own work at present has been, we have completed drawings for 2 churches. One is 3 additional buildings for an earlier church designed in 1968, and we're in the last third on the working drawings for another church. And this has become interesting to me because the client is a collective client. The difficulty of finding common denominators in the members of the building committees of the churches is rather difficult. But there's one thing about the church that I like, and it resembles the single-family house in that it is something that is made to serve the needs of the entire needs of a person, or the needs of an entire person, as few other buildings are. A house, as you know, is a space in which one spends more time, more different sides of his life are lived there, the more intimate and personal parts of his life are lived there. And the opportunity is there if the architect is capable of sensing those things, of designing for them, and, as an architect should in any case, of anticipating wants that even the client himself doesn't want until he suddenly finds them satisfied. And this is the thing that has come to interest me more and more as my experience with building has gone on. I spend a great deal of time drawing things that could quite easily be transferred even without tracing. But the reason for drawing it is in order to study it. Lots of times after I've worked on it a while, I find it's not necessary to have that element at all. We can eliminate it entirely because what the drawing is really for is to determine whether some element that one drops into the design pot has any business being there. Because every other building that you've seen has it, isn't any reason necessarily that this building has to have it. And it's the time that one spends in real study that the drawing requires, the time it requires, that is one thing I think very much in favor of it. These churches differ quite a little bit, and church committees differ quite a little bit. And if this is the third and the fourth and the fifth building for the same committee that you have, you find it's a very different committee than that same committee was when you started. And I spent last evening presenting working drawings for the three remaining buildings of St. Giles Church to its building committee. And really this was just a formality, but one that they insisted upon going through with. And it was really just for the pleasure that they had in it. And it was certainly a pleasure for me. We couldn't bring the meeting to an end. It went on practically until midnight, when it was supposed to be over at 8 o'clock because two of the members had to leave. In all of this wandering around, I'm trying to say that I have found that the same things that I put into my first small houses, I'm putting in a larger measure, in a much more complex form, into bigger buildings for many people and not just one family, or as it ideally was for a bachelor, man or woman, where there was only one person to please. The complexity of a situation is a great advantage to the architect. The simple, tried and true textbook solution doesn't fit. And that is the only reason that your solution isn't the standard ready-made textbook solution. The most important thing that an architect can have is an intelligent and a demanding client. The demands need to be accompanied with intelligence, but it does more to free him from his own dependence upon the past, not just the past of other architects, but his own individual past, he must be freed from. And this is one accomplishment. My practice has remained general. It's always been predominantly residential, but there have been a good many other things too, even including a mausoleum that I can talk about all night long with a great deal of pleasure, because I treat it as a big joke. And I don't mean that I didn't do a very good mausoleum and that I didn't enjoy very much doing it, and I consider it one of my greater triumphs. All I mean is that there are things that one sometimes accepts as real parts of the problem, real parts of the persons involved in it, that one looks upon that way and has to look upon that way in order to take it. But the architect is like an actor in that he must put himself into a role. He must assume that he is the client, and he straightens out many quirks in the client, but he doesn't change him fundamentally. He only clarifies certain things, harmonizes certain things that have never been harmonized before. And this is the function of the building, to introduce harmony into the pattern of a person's living. He needs the building to produce that. And anyway, you can see what I've been doing. I've been doing churches in the last few months, the last year or two, and some houses.
Thornton?
Well, I'm still down the right at the minute doing a rather large school for trainable mentally retarded and physically handicapped students. And it's a new experience. I've done lots of schools in the past, but I've never done one of this type. Actually, it's similar to many other projects, but it's very absorbing, and going to some of these schools to see what the teachers and pupils and how things were handled, what was wrong with them, what didn't work, and what we could do. It's terribly exciting, but I went to 2 schools in the morning, and by noon I was ready to fall on my face because of the extreme emotional impact of these kids in the mentally retarded group and in the physically handicapped, particularly because of the visual complexity of their traumas. And my admiration for the teachers that are able to survive the hours that they spend and the patience that they have with these kids. It's a very rewarding thing to go through this thing. And then having gone through this and gotten a very, very loose program of the project, because they're learning so much, and they're learning that some things they've done are not adequate, and others ways of doing things. So it's a developing thing. It's not something that has complete standards. So it's a very exciting thing to do and to work out, and it's progressing, and it's very absorbing, and I'm also working on a project that's been on the shelf for years, in addition to the art building I did out of Cal State University of Thornton. The preliminaries were completed, and we'd gone partially through the working drawings before they didn't authorize the funds for the working drawings. And now they finally come through with the funds for the working drawings and specs, and the funds for the construction that they didn't have. So now it's going ahead, which is lovely. If they waited 6 months, I've been happier, because it's very exciting and also working. In addition, I'm doing 2 or 3 little remodelings. One little, it's becoming almost 2. House that I did about 25 years ago, and I did 4 remodelings to it for the same client, and now it's a slightly adjusted situation there, and now we're doing 2 more. It's very strange. It's changing like a chameleon. I mean, there's no similarity to the initial house, which was done by the owner who was doing it for spec to be sold, and then immediately this young man and his young wife bought the house and began expanding it and having a lovely time with it, and it took on a great deal more character and individuality because they were. It wasn't spec, it was people. now it's changed. It's interesting to see what's happening to it. It's losing so much. But after all, we can't expect things to remain permanently. Nothing ever does. People remain pretty much the same, but they change. So it's all very exciting, lots of fun. I'm doing lots of gardening in the process over the weekends, which I adore, so carry on.
Raphael?
To me, the whole world has requirements. Every human being has requirements. I don't like to operate and to make a fetish the fact that the human beings require this, a house requires that, or this other building requires that. I have designed houses, I have shipped to Hawaii completely prefabricated, all aluminum structures. Unfortunately, they didn't show the slides, I have them here, where I made all the drawings. I have them fabricated, there were no shop drawings. There was not even a screw missing, and that's the truth. Now I did that, and I went there to instruct the people. Completely prefabricated structures of aluminum. Beautifully done. Now, this was one item. I have done, also I've been working with a 100-story structure for Alcatraz, including with other buildings, made entirely of aluminum. Aluminum tubes, which will be fabricated not by a general contractor, only in the aircraft industry. I've investigated this problem in Pittsburgh with technical engineers. I went to NASA to have this investigated with wind, and believe me, our industry, our technology is so exquisite. We have metallurgy today. That's why I've been so much enamored with metals more than any other material, really, because there lies the biggest progress. We do today, we have airplanes that can take 5,000 degrees. I mean, some of the materials we use there, 5,000 degrees of heat. But imagine the implications this will have in our buildings, skyscrapers, instead of putting plaster cement to fireproof the damn things. There lies our area to investigate. We have graphite, some of our aircraft industry. We have now alloys of graphite which are even stronger than any aluminum. We are doing this. You know, the regular pencil that you write with, that little glorified pencil is quite interesting material with alloy, with aluminum. It's been made into materials of structure. I'll give you another interesting problem, which I gave to students of mine. I didn't know what to do. There was a problem for 2 days. I said, okay, design a chimney. They said, chimney, my God, yes, for smokestack. And I said, but the only difference is I don't want any polluted combustible particles to escape. That's the only thing, but make it architecturally. We know already from the standpoint of sound, how do we coagulate the uncombustible particles. We know that chemically to do it, but now let's do it architecturally. That was an interesting, challenging problem. And I can assure you, I'm sure I didn't have the slides here, but I have the most magnificent things that the kids came with. And I said, not only that, we're going to test it with smoke. After they made the models, they tried to use cigarettes, no cigarettes allowed. How about chemistry? Have you forgotten how to make smoke with sugar? Yes, immediately. Now, in order to design this, I said, we don't make designs, let's make models of this. So we can see it with transparent plastics. But there's so many interesting things we can do. I said, go to the A, go to the science, to ballistics, go study what happens when you throw something, the waves that ensues. What happens to the wave of water into a rock that is like that or is like that? What happens to this? The same thing with the smoke. And you have no idea what results I've had. The kids were so excited that they exhibited at the day, that night when I was giving a formal lecture, they displayed them all on the opening, on the lobby. But this is the thing that these kids have never seen. First it was sort of like a ridiculous little subject. A chimney. Who the hell, what the hell is a chimney? It's not an architectural subject, is it? But it is. Everything is an architectural subject. But you have to use your head. You have to use science. You have to use your own era. That's what I meant, to be part of your society today. Not yesterday, not the future. Today. This is, if you are operative, utilizing all the capabilities of your brains, of all your fellow men, what they have contributed in materials and knowledge, you're doing all right as architects. And I think the field is exciting. Anything else, it is boring. Believe me. And you'll be bored to death, and you'll be doing monstrosities such as we have all over the place here. Is that true? Okay, we agree on that anyway. To whom are you addressing this question?
Anyone.
Did you hear the question? I didn't hear it very clearly.
How do you relate to the fact that most people today don't understand modern architecture and don't really enjoy it?
Well, it's because, first of all, modern architecture has been very poorly represented. There's a great confusion. What they call modern is just a word, you see. And then what there is as modern examples, I assure you, it's very difficult for anybody to comprehend because it's a confused issue. And if you say somebody says modern, Chinese modern, Grecian modern, this modern, what is modern? Nothing. It's confusion. It's a big subject that you cannot define in adjectives or styles. I told you before, style is thought expressed with a mere amount of words. If you can make people understand that, maybe they'll understand something. And that's a structural problem, not a whimsical problem.
I think it's been a long evening. We've had a gracious panel. You've been a wonderful audience. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming. Thank you all for coming. Our next session will be next Wednesday, the 22nd.
Yes, I think so. I think it got better.
There were some very good things.
Can you find the president? How are you?
Find a house for something English. You must be here. Did Ray see you? No, I'm so glad you came.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Great idea.
I just came back and
So I got it today. I just got
I thought they would never arrive. They were mailed last week.
Well.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, I guess we can get started. This will be the last year I think I will make this particular presentation, or any part of this particular presentation. This is going on the fourth year. First year, I guess, was a little too long and really a little too historical. I forgot the second year, and the third year I gave most of my time to Glenn. So this time it's still, I feel, in a way, a little too long. But and the reason I'm saying it's the last time I'll do it this way, because I think part of the introduction that we give to you here is for you to better know, I think, what we're about. And I think tonight we'll run this on video, so therefore I think in following years, students who want to know about the faculty can follow part of it on video, and then hopefully the kinds of discussions that will take place will be more philosophical, and we'll be dealing with issues and new issues rather than, say, historical or old issues, at least for some of us. The presentation tonight is going to be really in about 4 parts. Part of it is that I go back, and I'm supposed to be younger this year anyway. I've been in private practice for about 22 years. I started my own practice about 2 years after I got out of college, and I became licensed then. I immediately went into my own practice, and most of my whole career has been in that kind of practice. The first 16 years I practiced alone, and in most cases that was pretty much alone. I most had 4 draftsmen, and most of the time I was working with 1, sometimes 2. So most of that work, which is primarily in the housing area, houses and housing, is personal. About the last 6 years, when I became involved with education, I also became involved with the partnership. And the way I'm going to start out tonight will be first to present the work of the partnership, and then I'll go back through some of the historical stuff that I did, the early work. And then the prime part will be in the 3rd part, where I'll be dealing with a set of issues that many of you have seen and many of you have been involved with, but the ones that I've been most concerned with over a period of about 8 or 9 years, 10 years. And then finish out with some images and attitudes that I have about what I plan to do in the next, particularly this year, and possibly in some future time. So let me start first with then the work of the partnership, how it really came about. After being in practice about 16 years, I became involved with issues, well, it was actually sooner now. After about 10 years of practice, I became involved with urban design issues in the city. And at that time, Herb Kahn, Rex Lottery, and I were involved with the AIA Urban Design Committee. And we each had our own practices. Herb had a partnership in the Valley with Ed Farrell. Rex Lottery practiced alone about the same amount of time I had practiced. And each of us, though, were trying to expand our points of view and particularly be involved with social issues, land issues, housing issues, whatever there was to be involved with in terms of planning and those kinds of concerns. And what happened through this period was after working together, I guess it was about 6 years, that was sort of weekends, after hours, nights, we got to like each other and found that working on planning problems particularly, we enjoyed doing those together, and we then formed the partnership. So in the first part then, I will sort of quickly run through the kind of work we do, just so you have some feeling of the scope of the firm and the scope of issues that I'm involved with in some form. Now, in a partnership and in an office that is not large either, I mean, our office now varies from anywhere from 8 to 15. It's probably at its largest right now. We deal with a group of issues, but at the same time, this is the kind of work that would fall under what we categorize as team design. This is the work where not one principal takes a single job, but in most cases there's a lot of discussion that goes on, there's a lot of interchange, a certain amount of compromise, and it's a completely different kind of a type of work than, say, the second group of work that I'll show you, which is much more personal. And that's mostly at the housing and house scale, in which one can deal more readily and more closely sometimes with a client. And I think there the team gets in the way, and you can't really deal with those issues too well at a team level. Teamwork, as you all know, and most of you have tried to work in teams periodically, and I found through times I've been involved with education, usually teams start and teams break, and teams sometimes come back together again, but it's a much more difficult way to work, particularly when you're dealing with design. If you're dealing with planning issues, it's pretty good. In fact, it's very, very good. In design, it can be good too, if there's a common goal and you can strengthen each other. But in many cases, you have similar goals, but you have different attitudes about those goals. One partner may be more socially oriented, another may want to be more dynamic in the design solutions. One may not give a damn about one set of issues, and one may care more about another. And over the period of time, you find that you really take sides in a sense. And so you get into that sort of compromised position, I think, in terms of what comes out. And every so often you get a project that does work out, I think, better. But quite often it's more difficult to deal with. So let's hit the slides and we'll go from there. Can I have the lights? Let me move this one back and out. Oh wait, I'll leave it up. Okay. We'll start on this right-hand side, and this is talking about, these were the reports and the kinds of studies that we were involved with the AIA, in most cases, and in one case with the Goals Council and the Goals Committee of the city, from about 1963 to about 1969. The group came together first to do a hillside development study for the Santa Monica Mountains. At that time, I think Herb and Ed Farrell and Rex and I were concerned about the issue that most of the hills were being cut up in the typical padding that was going on that you've seen. And we wrote a set of, we showed a prototype of the way hills could be used, and that isn't it on the left, but we'll come to that later. But it was dealing with it because it would be apropos to this at a later date. But we were opposed to that kind of development. We were looking for cluster development and more concentrated development. That was one study. Then at that time, in around I think 64, 65, there was the first rapid transit corridor study. And this was coming up for a vote, and a group of us in the AIA did a study of that, wrote a report on how we felt about it, and then went about questioning the architects and the groups that were involved with that. And it was later voted down anyway, but it was an interesting involvement with the transportation schemes of those days. Okay, then we went into the gray area study area, which I think, if you remember, Bill Simonian gave a little bit of background on that. And then we were all involved with the goals committee, developing goals for the city of Los Angeles, and then I headed the housing portion of the summary report of the Los Angeles goals. This is, well, I knew I couldn't read that, but anyway, this is part of the gray area study. This was taking the North Broadway area. Those of you who've just gone downtown who've been in my Friday morning class have been able to see this area. This is this really should be reversed, but the freeway, the Santa Ana freeway, no, the San Bernardino freeway, the Hollywood freeway is on the upper part of the scheme here. Let me turn this on. There. Civic Center is here. The civic development is there. Here's Union Station. This is Olvera Street, Chinatown, and some of the other developments. This was a scheme to take that whole railroad area and turn it back into kind of an interim use, and that would be a walk park type of scheme that could be developed for the city of LA, picking up some of the node points while it was in transition. And it's interesting that at this point in time in our office, we're back into a study of the movement of the people in downtown LA, and one of the prime areas again becomes these railroad tracks, and whether the tracks will stay within this area as we get into our own development. So it's been very interesting through the years that the developments and some of the studies we were into are now coming back to us to study really through the office. This was some thoughts on what to do with the LA River Basin, and that's taking the downtown area, damming it up, using it in a way that could be used for boats and for joyous type use, particularly during the summer months. And this was a proposal that actually Councilman Snyder took to the council, but there were many reasons that the Corps of Engineers and other people had that this could not be done. That's still, I think, a fallacy, but that's where it is. This was another study in the gray areas that took a typical strip commercial and showed a way of developing the four corners, bridging across, and trying to develop a tighter concentration and a stronger neighborhood shopping center. Here again, we're back to the transportation study. This was a scheme that Herb Kahn and I had developed, which said, let's use the freeway corridors. Let's make those the prime use areas. Let's take the automobile out of the city core, use it in a way that you would lease it and move from the city in another transportation route, but within the metropolitan area, develop a smaller vehicle, preferably electric vehicle, that would be computer run and attached. And along with that, we developed certain nodes and areas that could be used for strengthening up the centers and the centers concept that later went on to be used by the city planning department. Now the interesting part is we're sort of back here again, not in quite the same way. We at that time had recommended the use of buses on the corridors as a first run to see whether it would really work, then developing, gradually phasing out the automobile in this area and trying to get back into a smaller vehicle that could then run through the areas. Now it looks like one of the prime potential for the city of Los Angeles will be this bus run in its special corridor, the one that now we have an example now from San Bernardino and El Monte, on San Bernardino Freeway from El Monte running into LA, and that has a good possibility of becoming the first phase of a transit use for the city. In the next 2 Friday mornings, not this one, but the week after this, and then the week after Thanksgiving, Rex Lottery and Herb Kahn will be coming in to talk in the morning. So any of you who are interested in what is happening with, 1, the political processes in planning, and 2, what is happening with our study in the downtown area should attend that particular morning session. I won't go into it here. Okay, now let's move to some of the work then once we got together. Is that off, Jerry? Can I have that on? Okay, now these again won't be in necessarily in order, but it give you some idea of the scope of the work that we have in the office. This is showing a new town scheme that we developed. It was a very small new town out in the Valencia, near Valencia itself. There was a large piece of ground out there owned by the Whitaker Corporation, and they wanted a study on what to do with that land. So we had made this proposal for this small new town in that area that would then interrelate this way with the total community. Our property is here. These are outlying areas around the area. There's Valencia, this would be Newhall, Solomon, and so forth. And this was sort of at a center point. We figured there would be some movement through this on the way to some of these others, and we were going to develop conceptually something that would work about like this. And you'll see it better as I move into it. The model of the scheme was like so. The majority of the land was left not built upon. We used really some of the principles of our own land use planning that we had done back in '63 and developed a rather concentrated type of development of high-density housing here, a small commercial center here, some lower density housing here, again some other high density that would tie in, and then over here was the research center and industrial portion of to be used by Whitaker. And actually there's a railroad track that comes in here, and that's why that was pulled down to this end of the line. Transportation net that ran through the thing in that direction. Again, we dammed up a portion for water reservoir. We tried to maintain this valley that runs through this portion where most of the green was existing. Most of these hills, if you know that area, are pretty barren hills. And so this kind of development tucked in would be, we thought, fairly reasonable at that time. What did I do? Let me come back one. Wait. Okay, there I'm there. And I want to come back on this one. Okay. Another shot of the model in the more concentrated housing level, cross-section through the area showing some of the housing down to town center, bridging across and back into this other part of the housing. God. Oh, wait. Okay. It's getting bad. Okay, now I showed you kind of the finished scheme before I show you really some of the processes that went into it, and I'm only going to show you a portion of these processes. If anybody's really interested in following one of these studies through, I'd be happy to go through it more thoroughly. I'm not intending to try to do that tonight. I'm just showing you some of the things that architects and planning firms do and how they go about it. Two of the issues that we dealt with would be, in this case, topography, in this case, environmental character. Of course, you deal with the land use, as you saw earlier. We would deal with the views that are shown here, which we'd work with geology. We work with all of the parts prior to coming up with our decision. And as many of the things related to how we looked at the site in this fashion, how it's set up in this fashion, how the geology existed, and so forth. And then in the scheme itself, of course, we tried to, this is again is the sort of projection of what the commercial center might have looked like. Eric Moss isn't the only one who runs these things. That's one of my sketches, so we're not that far apart. Anyway, what we tried to do in this scheme was to hold people within about a half-mile walking distance of this. This was meant to be pedestrian through this portion and then vehicular through this portion. This shows the town center, some of the other development around it. It was only a 10,000 population, so the center is projected a little bit heavy in terms of the way it was done. We never got into the later stages, which we should have, and from the discussions I've given you on new towns and the Friday mornings, you know, and I know that unless we get up into, well, probably a couple 100,000, do we really get a center that works in a real strong way? So this would be what you'd call really a bedroom community, small town, with probably a projection that wasn't as correct as it should have been, particularly as I look at it today, you know, about 6 years later. Here's another study that was done in the office. This was a open space and conservation plan for the city of San Clemente. This is a composite overlay of all of these elements that read over on this side. I hope you can all see them. And finally, the kind of orange-brown area are the areas that we felt could be developed. And we established criteria for this, and the city followed that. Unfortunately, by the time we came in to do this study, a great amount of development had already taken place, but this was to be used for future development, and it's a land use study. Another type of study we've been involved with is the city of Inglewood. We've done a fair amount of work for the city of Inglewood. Initially, we were called in to do a CBD study, a central business district study. At that time, what they wanted to do was bring in a regional shopping center, which we were not strongly for, but that was the solution most cities were using to try to upgrade their central business district. And then this was a projection of some housing and some development that could take place later. Okay, what finally, they were never able to make this come about. In the meantime, though, the city of Inglewood, which is rather progressive and has used federal funds quite well, did get funds to do some development of their Market Street, which is this main street here, which we projected as a closed-off street eventually, and start some of the development at this time. Okay, and this is the plan of how to use that particular area and change the parking scheme and redevelop it. And we've actually continued with this development, plus another piece of development, plus another street, plus some of the graphics for the area, and it's kind of interesting. I mean, it's a kind of urban design scale that begins to be built. And even though it makes small impact in a sense at the beginning, it starts to become a better thing. This is the way it looked in Inglewood. This was just shortly after some of the revamp was put in, which was, again, the center strip set of trees, some of the benches, park benches and planting areas, place for some of the trash. We had designed a whole set of things for this, but they didn't get into that. More definition of crosswalks, changing the parking scheme that exists. And this would just be like what would be categorized as phase one. Worked on the graphics for the area, which picked up, as you'll see in a minute, another set of graphics that we had begun for the area. Let's see, okay. another shot of that. And then many of you have come from the airport have probably seen this, which is a portal sign for the city of Inglewood. We have, now there are 2 of those in existence. I think we were set to do about 5 of them, and then with the amount of tree planting that's going on and some of the redevelopment, I think you won't see it now, but in probably about 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, Inglewood will have a character rather special compared to others. There's one area, though, that I've always sort of felt that they're missing the boat on, and I really feel that Inglewood is trying to sort of upgrade what is an area that's sort of going down as a commercial area. They have 2 strong points, or 3 strong points going for it, in my opinion. They have the Forum, they have the Hollywood Racetrack, and they have the airport. And I really feel that Inglewood would be much stronger if they would take those elements and build on those elements and develop those kinds of things that would be used in conjunction with really what their city is, I think, mostly made of. And instead, they're not doing that. But whether the city goes down or not, I don't know. At least they'll have a lot of nice trees in the years to come. We also work on graphics for the city. This is a public parking garage for them, and this is some graphic work we've done. So you see we're doing planning, we're doing graphics, we're doing landscape. We've done various kinds of work. We've taken some of their electric plant areas and worked those over a little bit. The rinse and wash rack for the what do we call it? I forget what, corporation yard, really, for the city. All right, let me go. I'm missing this already. Okay, let me go back 1 on each. And again, it includes the gas, which goes in relationship to this. Then the building itself, which we worked on and actually originally our intent was to have a different image than this completely in terms of what we were working on. We were hoping we could work with metal cladding, and we had hoped to have really a unit that could be fabricated and brought in and developed in this way. Then when we couldn't get that one going because of cost, we then developed the concrete frame, hoping we could infill it with the metal panels, which are more like the door panels, but again, brick proved to be the cheaper material for infill, and the building went this way, which I don't feel has the industrial character that I think most of us really wanted in the office. That one on the right should have been pulled. That's the interior. Now I'm out of sequence. Okay. Having trouble even have these things down. Okay, that's another industrial type building we've dealt with. And again, a large play with landscape in this particular one. Then we've also dealt with rehabs. These 2 buildings are a block apart from each other. This is one corner which had a kind of a nice old Spanish building, and we did some very simple development with it, cleaned up some of the arches slightly, cleaned up some of the windows through an overhead walkway for protection, and left the building pretty much alone a block away. Then we went into this new development, which is a similar kind of a corner with another set of buildings. Some shots through it. God, I keep going wrong. Okay, so many of you may have seen this one in Beverly Hills. And then along with something like this, we've also done work like this. This is in the barrio in East LA. It was part of a total park development, which I don't have shots of. This was just a transition from the school, the way kids would go to school, come down through the park, and then go back into their housing area. Just, again, showing diversity. Same time, we worked on things like Watts Willowbrook area. This was a study of Century Freeway and the Industrial Freeway coming together, and then taking an existing neighborhood and phasing it through a couple of phases where we would develop a linkage from the elementary school area and the junior high school area, and then a little green area that would go up to the commercial, leaving all the housing in through this part, and then some industrial that was right in here. And the object here was to not, even though the freeway was coming in and disrupting the neighborhood, we were trying to show an example of how you might keep the neighborhood still intact. Questionable whether they would even want to do that, but this was a study on that kind of an issue. Other kinds of things we've been involved with are student housing. These are planned schemes. This is again was set up to do a multiple dwelling scheme for Inglewood. We were just setting the standards, and in order to show the standards, we set a scheme down in which we could develop where we felt parking should be, some of the setback rulings, where we felt planting buffers should be, and so forth. And this was to be followed then by whatever group would take over the planning or the building of this particular development. A plan for a scheme for high-cost housing along the ocean, and another scheme for low-cost housing that we did out in Pasadena. So we've I want to go here. Okay. And this is some of the low-cost housing. Again, this is probably a completely different image and a completely different way from the way I've worked most of my career. This is stuff at the very lowest cost level. I think at the time we were shooting for about $8.5, $9 a foot, and therefore using the simplest construction techniques one can use. And really all you can do here is sort of additive architecture, pretty much just tack on some punched windows. It was a hard kind of a scheme to work on in many ways because the latitudes were so narrow. But and we go now. Okay, now I jump into the second phase, and what I'm going to do is just deal now with personal work. All the work that you saw was primarily work that was done, as a team. Now, this goes back to, and I'll try to run through it fairly quickly. I won't talk to it as much as I did with the other. My tendency, the desire here is not to talk as much tonight, but I'm already into too much talking as far as I'm concerned. This starts out about 1953, 54, that area, that time frame. Again, usually I've introduced this in previous times with the kind of where architecture was and where I was and what was going on at that particular point in time. In the early 50s, most of us who had gone to school during the, after, say, from about 45, 46 on, right after the Second World War, were really kind of the first group of architects coming along who were following behind those of, the Wrights and the Gropiuses and the Mies van der Rohes and the Neutras and the Schindlers and the whole group who had developed much of the modern architecture thought. Our goals at that time, and this doesn't express it the best of all the jobs, but I'm starting here, were to deal, in my goals at least, were several. First of all, I wanted to not deal with particularly conventional construction techniques totally. I wasn't interested in doing balloon framing. I was primarily interested in expressing the attitude of a structure that was then infilled by some form of a panel system. And again, most of architecture, I guess, suffers from the idea that most of the time you're dealing with an idea or a thought process, but quite often not being able to do it in the way that you would really truly like to do it. So what architects tend to do, and they've done that through the industrialized periods and every other time in the world, is to give a look of something that is of what it's trying to do. That doesn't mean that the structure here is dishonest. It's an honest structure. The infill panel, of course, is still a plaster panel or a drywall panel, and it would have been preferably done in another way, and the brick would have been probably a different kind of a material use. But again, this begins this dealing with the structural frame, the post and beam frame, the infill wall, and that kind of an attitude. And so much of the work that you see here is that. Now, the other things that I was dealing with naturally are very much involved with the client's program at this point in time, how the user would be involved with their own house. I spent hours and hours with clients in the early stages dealing with their particular issues. And even though I won't talk to that in every house tonight, I have always been user conscious, and probably a little less so in the later stages, but not because the user wasn't involved, but because I was also involved with some other sets of ideas that I wanted to deal with. So we deal with the user, we're dealing with site relationships, we're dealing with how to control sun by overhangs and by trellises, and you can pretty much see in this one that, you know, the overhangs themselves are doing the shading job, and the trellising is developing the cool. This is in the valley where today you might do a more closed job. But at that time I was dealing with the trellis as that kind of a thing, the overhang as that kind of a thing, in order to develop the same kind of cooling, sometimes water pool that you'll see as we go into this. Okay, so that's the primary sets of issues that I was dealing with, and then using glass pretty much as a negative material, in other words, filling the voids and allowing the flow of space from inside to outside. And we'll just run through these in fairly quick order. Here I just introduced a few plans, because at this stage I was, again, primarily involved with how the user was going to use the house, and Steve talked to it last week about saving trees and not saving trees. Well, I guess in the West Coast, in most sites, you don't have the tremendous number of trees that he had on that Eastern Coast site. But anyway, these are all existing trees on the site, on this one. And this is also another set of existing trees. Therefore, the plan relationships are very much related to those, so that there was a saving of these. And the way the land was used, the front part of this site is a sloping site, flat on the upper site. So I used the kids' areas, the pool, their play area, and so forth is on the flat. The family connection and the dining kitchen connection were the mid connection, and the living room, master bedroom were at this part of the wing. This is just a simple living, dining, study, kitchen, privacy part of the house of that sort, or let's say public part really, and then the bedroom wing over here in its sense. The first house that was on the left is, this looks like so. Again, the penetration of walls coming through. My work has never been skin work. I never expressed the skin different from the structure. The structure and the infill and the walls are always the same. An external wall will always be treated both internally and externally the same way. I don't change materials as I move from outside to inside, as many architects do, and I try to develop the penetrations and the pulling out of the wall forms. This again probably falls back more onto many of Wright's principles, and it probably would also then be furthered later by many of Neutra's attitudes. It's an attitude today that seems to be not used at all by most designers. And at that time, and I still think it's very appropriate for the Southern California area. And I think you'll probably, well, you won't see it now because of the problem with energy, but the ability to really knock down the change from inside to outside was really a goal that many of us were working with, and I particularly was working that way. Today, many people are working just the opposite. How do you actually separate the exterior from the interior? So there are two sets of philosophies. They both probably have their degree of validity, and you make your choice and go your way. But this, again, is the attempt always to penetrate, even with the steps and moving those through, moving yourself out from the inside with more openings and less solids. And in these cases, again, about the only solids usually were shear walls, and in this kind of a scheme. This then was the house that I showed you on the second plan. These are where the trees penetrated that house. Again, a fairly simple post and beam kind of a house at that time. If I want to head on that one again. I'm having trouble with that. Okay. And then that was the outside deck. This faces north, and again, it's dealing primarily with site relationships, views, planning schemes and those sets of issues, and a simple construction method, which was normally a post and beam system. Another house of a similar kind of vernacular, doing some of the same things that the others were doing, developing privacy courts versus the view side on the other. Another house. So this one sets up a little different set of issues. This is all a steel columned house and a big float roof, and the steel columns here allowed this to have no shear panels and a complete opening to the view side.
Where is that, Ray?
That's in Baldwin Hills area. Again, let me just stop for a minute, because you're seeing mostly wood houses, and I want to explain that, and except for this one that I did with a steel column. I used wood, not so much that I was in love with wood. I mean, had steel been a competitive material, I probably would have done mostly steel houses at the same time. Wood was always cheaper. Wood could accomplish somewhat the same things, except that you did need the shear panels. As a result, I didn't use steel through most of my jobs. I tried through this whole period of time usually to be about 10% higher than what would be normal cost. These are not trying to be they were never trying to compete with dingbats at the lowest level of cost. If the general costs were running about $10 a square foot at the earliest periods, I was running 11. When they were running 11 or 12, I was running 14. I felt for what the people were getting in terms of space, and in terms of interrelationship with their sites and views, and what came about through this process, that the extra $1 or $2 a square foot was probably, should have been worth it to them, and it usually was, because this is what they were looking for in terms of lifestyle. They couldn't get it in the typical tract house that was available to them, just as they can't today. Most of these houses, by the way, were for very young people, not people who had a lot of money. They were usually, quite often they were engineers with either Hughes, or some of them worked with Rand Corporation. I seem to have a lot of those type of clients, and they were excellent clients. And the greatest satisfaction I had through this period was that I think every client I ever had during this period, and really later, other than for a couple of exceptions, always felt that the house I did for them was the best house I ever did. And that always made me feel good, because it made me feel that I was really solving their problems. And even later, when I was dealing so much with my own problems instead of their problems, people still feel that the house is still so much more for them than any of the others that I've done. And this is kind of a nice feeling. But I don't have the patience I once did, and I don't deal with the issues quite the way I once did. At this time, I used to spend hours and hours and nights in client conferences, and really making friends of most of the clients, and enjoying it, and enjoying that in a relationship. And I think it was partly due to the fact that they didn't have a lot of money, that by doing the job, they got more than they would have gotten the other way, and I think there was an appreciation that was very special at that time. Just some other houses, varying types. That isn't very true color. A lot of you have probably been in this house, but it's awfully hot color. It isn't that hot. I'm just running through these. Again, I'm showing this plan. This house was developed on pilings, and again, this is right up near my house on Rustic Canyon. This breakback relates to the stream itself, and the piling system is spaced, in most cases, trying to get 16 feet on center on this square unit. I think I was 24 on this group here, but all these again run into the 16. These are the support points here, 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 and here. And it expresses the piling locations on up, and it dealt with it in this way. Now again, you could deal with this stream in many, many ways. This house followed from the client having seen a house that dealt with a set of issues like so, and it followed somewhat the same thinking processes. Now, quite often that's what will happen again in housing types that you deal with for private clients. One client will like what they've seen for somebody else, and so for a period you'll deal with sometimes the same issues over and over in various ways. This again is just trying to show you the structural system in a clearer form, the red lines here following through as the overriding pattern, even though the house is moving around a fair amount within this total. This house bridges from the street, the car parking goes under. It develops through several levels and 2 stories through here, half levels through here, and so forth. And from the pool side and from the front side. Inside again. Okay, and then during this whole period of time, I also did a series of garden apartments, and I just want to run through these so that you can get some idea of what I was working with. This is a little 6-unit apartment building that I did. This is actually my first job. It was done about, I guess 22 years ago. Again, it was these were 600 square foot apartments, plus or minus. They varied. I had a movable wardrobe through here, so in some cases people would move this to develop a very tight bedroom, a larger living room, and so forth. But they were small units. They were for single people or for young couples, and that's about where I was with my head at that time. And so I guess I was thinking in those terms when I was dealing with people. And they've been successful apartments through the whole period of time. I don't think there's been a vacancy in this apartment in 22 years. Let me go back here. Wait. So this is this apartment right here, and this is the deck it works on. If any of you have been in Doug's place, it's this little unit here. There are 2 patios to this side. This was done on a spin plan. It's a rotated system, and so that each of the upper stories has the patio over the one in front. And then since I did this with Carl Maston, who did the building next door to it, and we tried to keep our materials similar and keep even though we designed them differently, they could be worked in conjunction. Here I was, knowing what the architect on this side would do, I was able to take advantage of his side yard. So I could extend my patios and get that extension into his side yard. And this is the advantage of 2 people working together who are dealing with the same kind of issues. Usually architects are not doing that. They're trying to make their statement against another statement that's alongside of them. There's no coordination, and you get this kind of sort of free-for-all. This is mine, this is yours, and so forth. I'm proud to say that usually here people think I designed both of them, or if they talk to Carl, they think he designed both of them, and I think this is a nice feeling where 2 architects can work together doing different but similar things and make them together. I don't have 2 shots side by side, so which I should have done to go into that explanation. Another garden apartment, another one that was done at that time, somewhat in the same vein. Always dealing with privacy and the outside little patio and the garden itself through this period, and I did several apartments of this type. And then I went into another period, and this one deals a little closer. It's about the only time I dealt more with the skin. Here there's really not too much, this isn't really a structural kind of a scheme. It deals with a system of bearing walls and span between. And then I was trying to, at this stage, reach down and be competitive at the apartment house market with the cheapest stuff being done. And of course the way to do that is to use conventional construction methods, using plaster, and then, which many people don't bother with anymore because they write everything in through one plane, and I don't think that's bad. This deals with a whole set of little issues of massing that develops slight shadows, slight play. And the other thing that it has going for it probably is the idea of this kind of a walkway in which privacy is gained by dropping this balcony movement system below the upper deck level so that people walking by aren't looking into each other, yet it still allows the balcony approach or quarter approach to the unit. And so it's a small idea, but it worked quite well, giving privacy and still developing that kind of a thing. Of course, it's a 2-story unit, and this was done, I don't know, what, 10, 12 years ago, 14 years ago. And this is some of the things I was talking about, just working with little reveals and little plays through the massing, and some window treatments. Same kind of thought process going on. And one of the ideas on this particular set of this building was to get rid of the elevator on a 3-story building. This is fairly common now. When I did it quite a few years back, it wasn't really being done that I know of that much. And this is where the first floor apartments are 1-story apartments. As I then moved to the 2nd floor, these are studio types, and we got rid of, they could then be a walkway system. And it's a very tightly packed apartment unit on a builder's type site, yet the privacy is developed through the decks and the patios and the individual parts that were separated out. Okay, and that was the 3rd floor of the unit I just showed, and okay, let me go back. I have these down every time I look the other way. I change them. Here's where I want to be. Okay, and then now we're getting towards where I'm going to be taking off into my main thinking process for tonight. And this was the last building of that series. And originally it was designed to be an all-plastered building as well. The owner of this one, though, wanted to incorporate some wood elements, and so this is the way it came about. Okay, now this was a series of just vertical massing, no real structural significance here. It's fairly typical in many ways. I developed a furring system to pick up some of the spans and to keep some of the doors in conventional sizes, but it's just somewhat the same thought processes we just went through. It was this building, though, that started to change my thinking greatly towards how these things should be done. It was 20-some units. I felt because of it, they had similarities throughout, but the control and supervision just seemed to be so difficult. What was going on in one kitchen was different from what was going on in another, even though they were designed the same. There were just a million little parts that weren't being controlled the way I thought they should be. And then this site to this side was also owned by the same owner, and there was a projection for another set of condominiums there. And at that time, I started to think in the office about a system that would make more sense. I mean, could we not control the development better if we started to develop, and this is, I guess, this is 63, 64. If we developed the vertical towers, spanned across with a structural system, built the unit on the site, but craned it in and slipped it in. So the object was to go to a slip-in system. Later you'll see the rest of my thinking really relates to that. I'm going to insert here a project that was done in the partnership, but really showed the idea that was never accomplished on that site next door to the one I did before. And this was a student housing scheme for Sonoma State. And here it shows the development of an 8x12 vertical stack. This is it in its horizontal position, taken to the vertical. The lamb beam system that would span across, the slip-in of the bedroom and the living room units, the tack-on of the balcony system. And in plan now you'll start to see this kind of notation used throughout so that there's a consistency in the rest of the things I'll show you. These units were always bath or kitchen units. They were always 8x12 by varying lengths, depending on what was needed. That way they could either have been built on the site, they could be transported to the site, and they could deal in that kind of a modular system. The bedrooms would either be, in this case, this is a 12-foot dimension plus 4 plus 4, so we're looking at 20 feet in this kind of a unit. This would be the 12-foot unit itself. So we have the core units turned vertically, the slip-in of the living bedroom units. And this goes back to the served and service kind of element as well. The thing that I started to like about it and why I used it so much later through the rest of my thinking processes, and many of you have discovered this as you worked on your own projects, is you get rid of these elements, these things can almost do anything. Once you pull the bath and the kitchen and those elements out in some way, your other elements can then be kind of open-ended, and they have much. You can get much more variety out of this. And what I'll start to show as I go through this is the kind of diversity that can be established off a single scheme or a single scheme idea, and that it doesn't have to always end up being the typical box situation, and that it can do quite a few things for you. Okay, now let's see. This is a sketch of, well, no, let me go back again. Okay, let me run through this series first. This is just showing you the service core in its position, some blow-ups. The bedroom unit described a little better if you can see it as it slip in. Again, the open ceiling here, this part being exposed to the weather, this part going between beams. And again, in this kind of a thing, in some cases those would be furred down, in other cases not. We would run our services between, where am I? Did I lose it? Can you see that? I can't, oh, there it goes. I don't know what happened. You're not getting it. Well, anyway, between beams would be your service movement, and you could swing through here. Turn it off. A little bit more so you can get a better idea. Balcony unit set on. And then the plan development in how they could then be tied together. You know, bathroom, kitchens, tied usually at a service point. Another kind of a development that could take place back to back, and then units working this way. These were two-story units. These were one story. We had some situations where we could cut out parts and go 2 stories with those too. So we had a variety of units here. These were set up for, at that time we were looking at the potential for sort of cooperative ventures in which people could live together in a cluster if they wanted to, or they could have separation. These are student housing types. Okay, and then this is a diagram or a drawing of what it would have looked like. And some of the plan diagrams that would take place over the site. Okay, now I'm going to move into the private house that develops from the same idea. And Jerry, can I have, I think, let's see, I'm out of this tray, so you want to give me that, you want to give me the other tray? Give me the tray over on this side, replace it. Okay, this is my own house that followed very shortly after that condominium and after this thinking process. And the first house I designed for this site was a completely different kind of a thing. And by the time it was more like the condominium in its thought process and like some of the other plaster jobs that I showed. And then as I was thinking about the other kind of a site, the other thing that I would be doing, it happened that on this site, I couldn't build what I first started to build. We broke ground, and the water problems were so great on the site that I felt that I would be able to test out some of the thinking that I had gotten into, at least in a not in a real sense, but in a sense of attitude only. And so the tower system worked very well here. It limited the amount of water that would be moved on the site. It allowed the house to be spanned across the site. It led me to the development of concentrating all my seismic forces into the concrete column system, and then spanning between with the lamb beams that step up as we go through the house. Another shot of it that gives you some idea of how it went together on this side of some of the construction techniques that were going on. Now, the idea, if I would have carried it ideally, would have been, in a house it's pretty hard to do this, it isn't really large enough, but would have been to slip in these elements in through this area right here. And actually the idea could work where you just slide elements in. I didn't build it that way because, again, it wouldn't make sense on a site of this large, and there weren't enough repetitive elements to make it make sense. Again, plan-wise, if you can relate back to what we had before, you see the core elements, you see the bedroom unit slipped in, each piece that could have been slid through and slipped in, but each one again would have its own element to it. Here, again, I deviated to some degree by pulling kitchen into a larger space instead of keeping it in the core, and in a slight enlargement on one of the bathroom areas. So there will be deviations from the initial thought process, but the idea is still somewhat the same. And then this is the construction method that took place. I think that one's a little out of focus. That's about as good as it goes, I guess. Okay, this was the mechanical service element. This was showing the way the services went from the kitchen to this bath. They shot down through this gallery-way. They picked up this part. They dropped at that point over on the left side down to the ground, and it's carried through at one point to the street. So I didn't want my services running all over the site because of the water problem, so I had to concentrate them and bring them through. And some of the construction system. And over here, the planned form now, you can see it more directly. The towers that are used for storage elements, studio level, main floor level. This is the master bedroom. These are the kids' rooms. And the main part of the house then is the public area, which is living room, upper living room, dining, kitchen, and the studio is down below in that area. Section through the house. In this, I didn't describe, actually, the way the site was used was that I stepped my beams up in relationship to the slope of the existing site. So in this direction, again, first set of beams is here, then I go against that with another set, I come against that again with another set, and each time it zeroes out at the point of slope, so the house responds very directly to the site. And this longitude in this section, and then the longitudinal section, it steps up the hill in the same way. These are exactly the natural contours, and no changing in the contour other than right at the parking area. Okay, can I have that other? Oh, it's okay. I got it, I think. You want, is 3 turned on? Okay. Now I'm going to take you through one house, my house in particular, in a very thorough way. And this here primarily because I want to deal with the element not only of structure, which I always deal with, mechanical systems, which were dealt with in this particular one. Perception is going to be a key one here as I move you through. And even though the system is a very regular system in a sense, I feel that one of the goals that I've always tried to accomplish was to keep a simple system, a regular system, a strong construction system and technique, at the same time developing a progression of space and dealing with a whole set of perceptions that can take place within a simple system. So starting from street side, moving up the walk to the entry door, coming on through. Well, a lot of you have been through the house, but let me just take you through on slides. The only reason I'm showing mine, I could do it with a lot of houses, but I don't usually spend as much time photographing them, and I don't have the time to do it in the same way, and I can't catch the times of day in quite the same way that you can in your own place. So here's entering the house, the skylight and all of these tower elements that throw light down into the space, the definite point of stepping across from landing to landing and using glass in this kind of a manner, which actually reflects up to the skylight, so those people who are not aware of the light coming in, as they start to make their move across the landings, their tendency is always to look down for protection, and as they look down, they see up, which tends to then, as they move across, then tends to throw your eyes up, as I showed before, to the skylight. As you move up the landing, you get a shot through a void that then lets you somewhat look into the studio and see across into that space. It's just one more visual thing as you're moving through that is experiential as you're coming up through the stair itself. Again, glass used, reflecting up, looking down, looking back down into the stair once you're up at the top, and the kinds of things that happen within it. Again, as you come to the very top landing, the first perception you have of the house is this opening up of a very large space. As you noted, the entry came through a very tight space. It gets down to about 7 feet, and as you move up the stair, you're getting into another kind of a whole set. As you enter the major space, then it opens up very strongly on you. Now, none of this was, I mean, in a sense, that was not the preconception prior to starting that whole progression. It came out of the process by which the house was built. But again, I can't, where the process stops and where the subjective infill takes place, it's really hard ever to define that. And any of you, as you start to design and as you have designed in the school, know that that's always very difficult. And when we ask you to develop process in your thinking and show us how you went through various stages and what was your backup and what did you do and what were your thinking processes, you know that in your own head at various points in time, some kinds of images and some subjectivity starts to move in, and then it starts to play its role in the game. So in my own house and in many houses that followed, I tried to keep the subjectivity to the minimum and allow it to play its role afterwards, rather than, say, come in with the preconception of the way I wanted to deal with spaces and let the spaces evolve and do their job for the fireplace corner of the living room, across the entire space, from the dining room on out to the deck, back again. Sort of the major space of the house then, from the kitchen looking back through the whole house, down into the studio, living room, upper living room, kind of one continuous space from the elements of the house, and skylights again, working through. My use of color is really quite often more in not in the walls themselves, as you saw last week in some of Terry's work and Steve's work when they were showing framing and framing through. I've usually tried to work in natural materials and keep the natural materials the main part of the frame and the framework, and then let the color play against that, in either through furnishings or other planes or other parts of the house, such as in this bathroom. And again, the bathroom here, which becomes a very dramatic vertical space, was not preconceived that way. It was just that the tower had to go this high to receive the beams related to the site and how it would be used. But then the way it's handled in a design sense later is how the elements then are juxtaposed and moved through. some of the outside deck areas, moving around the house. There are a lot of slides. Front deck. Deck off the studio. And then I go back and then now I want to talk a little bit about detail as well. Again, the glass is used in what some people would categorize as a negative sense. Actually, John Johansson, who stopped by the house before he went to give his talk last night and spent a little time with us, made a statement that he felt it was one of the best uses of negative glass he had ever been involved with, and that means just that the glass is used as the infill here to the system, and it's not used as a skin, it's not used as a in any other way than to allow the most freedom in this, to express the structure, allow the freedom of movement from inside to outside throughout. So therefore, then I get involved with trying to deal with it in this kind of the simplest way possible. I could have, even, and this is one of the, as I go through it, you'll see what happens. Here, the attempt here was to pull it off, miter it into the concrete in order to make the concrete be understood as the supporting element, and then, even though the mullion takes place over to the other side, there I would have liked to have had less going on and really have diminished that mullion so that there'd be no confusion at all of what's holding what up, and the attempt here to show that the concrete's doing the job, not the post, and have the system work in that sense. We'll just go through and look at glass now. Again, the mitered corner, which opens up the corner and pulls it off the structure. You'll see more of that. And then the residual that you get out of glass, which is, I think, kind of neat, and that's all the reflectivity that takes place at various times of day, the way glass works at night, which is different completely than